Shalom and greetings, my friend. It appears we have the rare opportunity to converse beyond the confines of time itself. We come from very different lineages, mine rooted in the Torah and Kabbalah, yours in the Vedas and ancient Hindu wisdom. Yet both our traditions gaze upon the same heavens. I find it fascinating that across continents and millennia, both Jews and Hindus look to the stars for meaning. Our ancestors even embedded celestial symbols in holy places. Here is an example I recall: a 6th century synagogue floor in the Holy Land decorated with a zodiac wheel in the center, surrounded by Hebrew labels for the months and signs. This ancient mosaic depicted above shows how deeply the zodiac was woven into our culture, despite a common modern assumption that Judaism shuns astrology. So, even in our synagogues, there was an understanding that the celestial cycles held significance. For us, these symbols were never seen as pagan gods, but as markers of divine influence in creation.
Namaste and warm greetings. Indeed, it's remarkable. In India, we call astrology Jyotish, the science of light. It too is ancient and sacred, one of the auxiliary disciplines of the Vedas. We have temple art and scriptures going back thousands of years referencing planetary deities and zodiac signs. In Hindu temples, one often finds a Navagraha shrine, 9 statues for the 7 classical planets plus the lunar nodes, around which devotees circumambulate. This reflects how astrology pervades our spiritual life. Even as your ancestors set zodiac mosaics in synagogues, mine were casting horoscope scrolls on birch bark. It seems across time and space, our traditions agree that the cosmic design is meaningful.
Agreed. We both treat the heavens as a divine text to be read. I propose we delve into specific themes to compare our methodologies and philosophies. Let's discuss the role of astrology in divine will versus karma, the different zodiac systems, tropical versus sidereal, we use, our planetary rulerships and metaphysical perspectives, the importance of fixed stars, Nakshatras, and Sefirot, the occult symbols in each system, like the tree of life and your Dashas, how we see astrology's role in magic, ritual, and spiritual growth, the weight of modern interpretations versus ancient texts, and even our views on compatibility and soul connections. We have much ground and sky to cover.
An ambitious agenda. Excellent. I am eager to learn how Kabbalistic astrology aligns with or diverges from the principles I know. Our exchange can be both philosophical and practical. Let us proceed topic by topic, with mutual respect and openness.
In Jewish thought, there's a classic tension between divine will and human free will. Astrology, from a traditional perspective, is seen as describing the natural influences, or mazal, literally flow, or constellation influence, that God imbued into creation. We often say Hakol bidei shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven, meaning God oversees all. Yet we also say Ein mazal Yisrael. There is no fixed star for Israel, implying that a person connected to the divine can transcend astrological fate. Our sages discuss this in the Talmud, for example. They relate how Abraham saw by the stars he would remain childless, but God took him outside to show him a higher reality above the stars. In other words, from the Kabbalistic view, the stars incline but do not irrevocably bind us, especially if divine providence or personal spiritual merit intervenes. Astrology is like a clock God uses to time events, but the clockmaker can reset it at will.
That's beautifully put. In our Vedic understanding, we frame it in terms of karma. A birth chart is often called a karmic blueprint. It reflects prarabdha karma, the portion of our accumulated karma scheduled to play out in this lifetime. This is akin to fate or destiny resulting from past actions. However, we too acknowledge free will, purusartha. Think of karma as having 3 types. Fixed karma, which is hard to change, like the family or era you're born into. Changeable karma, which you can influence by effort, and new karma we create by our choices now. The planets in Vedic astrology, the grahas, literally Caesars, are instruments of cosmic law. They deliver the fruits of one's past actions, but they are not acting capriciously or outside divine order. They operate under Ishwar, the divine. In the Bhagavad Gita and other texts, it's implied that God is the ultimate dispenser of karmic results. So in a way, our karma is a subset of divine will, a moral order set by the divine. We aren't ultimately bound if we pursue spiritual liberation, by attaining self-realization or devotion to God. One can transcend the karmic cycle, much as you say a holy person can rise above their star's decree.
That resonates with a Kabbalistic idea. One who cleaves to the Creator can access a level of reality above the astral forces. We even have stories of sages altering decrees, seen in the stars by the power of prayer or charity. Yet, for the average person, Judaism acknowledges that Mazal astrological influence can affect worldly matters, health, livelihood, etc. It's just that we're cautioned not to become fatalistic. The stars incline, God alone has the final word. Astrology in Kabbalah is thus a tool to understand the inclinations of divine providence, not an independent deterministic power. The balance is subtle, trust in God, but don't be ignorant of the cosmic tides He set in motion.
In Hindu practice, similarly, we advise not to live in fear of one's horoscope. We use it to identify karmic challenges and then apply remedies or make conscious changes. For instance, if Saturn, Shani, in one's chart indicates trials, perhaps due to past harsh actions, we encourage discipline, charitable acts, and perhaps specific spiritual practices to mitigate that. We even have the concept of upai, remedial measures, like mantra chanting, pilgrimages, or wearing certain gemstones, as ways to harmonize with or appease planetary energies, effectively seeking divine grace to soften karma. This parallels your idea of prayer and charity altering destiny. Both are traditions, I think, see the cosmic influences as very real, yet not absolute. There's a moral and spiritual dimension that can override or work through astrology.
Yes. In summary, for me, astrology describes the divine will as expressed through nature's cycles. It's like a cosmic script, but the author can edit the script in response to our actions or higher needs.
And for me, astrology is the law of karma in action, a just cosmic feedback system. But through dedication to dharma, righteous living, and devotion, one can go beyond that system. Our perspectives use different terminology, divine intervention versus karmic transcendence, yet we find a common principle. We are not absolute slaves to fate. Spiritual effort matters. Let's move to something more technical, the zodiac we use. One key difference between our systems is the reference frame. In Vedic astrology, we use the sidereal zodiac. The signs are aligned with the stars, the actual constellations in the sky. We divide the ecliptic into 12 equal 30 degrees segments, but those segments are anchored to fixed stars. For example, 0 degrees Aries in sidereal is fixed roughly at a point in the constellation Aries near a star like Ashwini. This means our zodiac accounts for the precession of the equinoxes. As centuries pass, the equinox shifts slightly relative to the stars, and our calculations include a correction, called Ayanamsa, to keep signs aligned with stellar positions. Currently, our sidereal Aries roughly corresponds to April 14th, May 14th in the Gregorian calendar, not March 21st, April 19th. In other words, it's about 23 to 24 degrees offset from the Western, tropical, Aries due to precession.
In my astrology, which is basically part of the broader Western astrological tradition, we use the tropical zodiac. That means 0 degree Aries is defined each year at the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, when day and night are equal and the sun crosses the equator around March 21. The tropical zodiac is tied to the seasons rather than the background stars. 2,000 years ago, tropical Aries and the constellation of Aries coincided, but as you noted, they've drifted apart. Today, on the spring equinox, the sun is actually in the constellation Pisces. Yet we still call that 0 degree Aries by definition. So, our zodiac is a symbolic division of the ecliptic, starting from the seasonal turning points. This makes Aries always the sign of spring, Taurus the mid-spring, etc., which carries symbolic meaning growth, flowering, harvest, and so on through the year's cycle.
We care about seasons too, but in Vedic thought, the connection to the fixed stars, the Nakshatras in particular, is crucial. The 27 Nakshatras are lunar mansions, divisions of the sky anchored by prominent stars, which form an older layer of our astrology predating the 12-sign usage. Our sidereal zodiac meshes with these nakshatras. For example, the start of our zodiac, 0 degrees Aries, is traditionally at the beginning of Ashwini Nakshatra, marked by certain stars. These starry references tie our astrology to the cosmos as seen. Philosophically, we say the macrocosm, the universe, and the microcosm, human life, should correspond accurately. If the stars shift, our charts should shift with them. Thus, sidereal reckoning keeps the as above, so below literally in sync with the visible heavens.
Interestingly, some ancient Jewish sources were aware of precession. Medieval Jewish astronomers like Abraham ibn Ezra noted the discrepancy between signs and constellations. However, since Jewish calendar months are tied to the lunar solar cycle, Nisan is always spring, Tishrei always fall. The zodiac in our tradition stayed seasonal. Kabbalistically, the zodiac is linked to the cycle of the Hebrew months. Each of our 12 months corresponds to a zodiac sign, and those are aligned with seasons and theological events, e.g. Aries Nisan, with Passover in spring, etc. We view the cycle of the year as spiritually meaningful, with the full moon of each month highlighting that sign's energy. So a tropical framework makes sense for us because it syncs with our calendar and festivals. Aries, the ram for instance, aligns with spring, and the biblical Passover lamb, a rich symbolic overlap.
That's a good point. Symbolism. In Sidereal, the symbolism is more tied to the mythic stars and their deity stories. For example, when we say someone has their moon in Ashwini, the first nakshatra in Sidereal Aries, we invoke the symbolism of the Ashwini Kumara twin gods, divine healers, often depicted as horse-headed. This imparts qualities of swift healing and initiative to that person. The seasonal cycle is less emphasized since India spans both northern and tropical latitudes. The seasonal feel is not uniform across the subcontinent. Instead, our signs inherit meaning largely from ancient mythic images and the natural qualities of the planets ruling them. There's debate even in India. A minority of Indian astrologers have explored tropical zodiac usage for compatibility with Western methods, but the mainstream stays sidereal, holding that the constellational truth outweighs seasonal drift.
So to distill our difference, tropical zodiac my side ties signs to the Sun-Earth seasonal cycle, an Earth-centered symbolic frame, whereas sidereal zodiac your side ties signs to the star field, a cosmos-centered frame. It's like two different map projections of the ecliptic. Both were aligned a few millennia ago and have since diverged. Each system finds meaning in its choice. I find meaning in Aries always heralding spring rebirth, while you find meaning in Aries always pointing to the same starry backdrop in mythos. Neither is wrong per se. They are two perspectives. The debate over which is astrologically more valid can be passionate. Some argue tropical is more psychological and tied to the solar cycle, while sidereal is more astronomical and fate-oriented. Perhaps our tradition simply developed with different priorities.
Well said. One could even argue this difference reflects our broader philosophies. The Jewish astrologer integrating with a solar calendar theology, festivals, agricultural cycles and a divine providence, and the Hindu astrologer preserving an ancient cosmic order, the stars as eternal markers of dharma. It's fascinating that despite using different zodiacs, both systems work in practice for their cultural context. People often ask how that's possible. I suspect it's because astrology is a language. Tropical and sidereal are two dialects, each internally consistent. The key is that within each system, the relationships between planets, signs, and houses are interpreted coherently.
I concur, though I admit, one reason I personally haven't adopted a sidereal approach is that our mystical tradition ties each Hebrew letter and tribe to a specific sign as fixed in our calendar. In the Kabbalistic text Sefer Yetzirah, the 12 simple Hebrew letters are assigned to the 12 zodiac signs and months. If I were to slide the signs backwards due to precession, it would throw off that elegant correlation with our sacred alphabet and holidays. So we stick with the old alignment. Meanwhile, your tradition built an entirely self-contained zodiac with its own lore like the Nakshatra deities etc., which wasn't anchored to an external calendar event like an equinox. Thus it could float with the stars. Different starting assumptions leading to different outcomes.
Precisely, and practically, it means if someone had the sun at 15 degrees Leo in a Western, tropical, chart, I might call that 21 degrees Cancer sidereally, and we might give slightly different interpretations. Yet, interestingly, many character traits or outcomes we predict could overlap or complement each other despite using different sign definitions. It's an endless topic among astrologers, but perhaps we've given a sufficient overview without getting too technical. We should delve into how each system handles planets next. Yes?
Indeed. Let's talk about the planets, the wandering stars. Traditional astrology in our Western Kabbalistic world recognizes 7 classical planets: Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury and Moon, each ruling 1 or 2 zodiac signs. For example, Saturn rules Aquarius and Capricorn, Jupiter rules Pisces and Sagittarius, and so on. In Kabbalah, we often connect these 7 planets to the 7 lower Sefirot, divine emanations attributes on the Tree of Life. For instance, Jupiter Tzedek in Hebrew, associated with benevolence and expansion, corresponds to Hesed, the Sephirah of mercy and kindness. Mars Ma'adim, in Hebrew, associated with severity and conflict, corresponds to Gevurah, the Sefirot of strength judgment. The sun is linked to Tiferet, beauty, balance, the moon to Yesod, foundation, reflecting the sun's light, Mercury to Hod, splendor, intellect, Venus to Netzach, eternity or victory, also relating to love, desire, and Saturn to Bina. Understanding the sphere of structure and limitation, though Bina is one of the upper Sefirot, it has Saturnine qualities of constraint. In this way, planets are seen not just as physical bodies, but as metaphysical principles, or divine agents. They are like the messengers or intermediaries, through which divine energy flows into the world of fate and nature.
Fascinating. You map them onto a spiritual diagram, the tree of life. We do something similar conceptually. Each planet, graha, in Vedic astrology has an embodied deity and a set of qualities, gunas, it represents. We have the same 7 visible planets plus 2 nodes, Rahu and Ketu, the north and south lunar nodes, which are shadowy but potent forces, especially for karma and spirituality. Our planets rule signs in a scheme very close to the Western one, since that system likely came from a common ancient source. For example, Jupiter, Guru or Brihaspati in Sanskrit, rules Sagittarius, Dhanu, and Pisces, Meena. Jupiter is considered the teacher of the gods, symbolizing wisdom and beneficence, akin to your description of Hesed. Mars, Mangala or Angarka, rules Aries and Scorpio for us, and he's the god of war, resonating with severity and courage, similar to your Jabura association. It's remarkable, without knowing it, Kabbalists and Vedic seers made parallel associations, Mars with strength and conflict, Jupiter with mercy and expansion, Venus with love and fertility, etc. This suggests these archetypes are inherent in the human experience of the planets.
I agree. It's like the planets carry universal archetypal meanings that mystics in different cultures intuited. In our lore, the planets also have angelic counterparts. For instance, the archangel Raphael is tied to Mercury. Raphael is a healer and guide, and Mercury governs communication and healing arts. Gabriel to the moon. Gabriel is a messenger often associated with birth and conception, lunar themes. Michael to the sun. Michael is like the light of protection, leadership, etc. So we see the planets as channels of spiritual beings or forces. They are the eyes of God watching over the lower world, so to speak. This is why we sometimes personify them. Shabtai, Saturn as a stern teacher, Madim, Mars as a warrior, and so on.
In India, we outright consider the planets as deities, or at least governed by deities. We have temples dedicated to Shani, Saturn, for example, and myths about him. Each day of the week corresponds to a planet and has mythic stories. Monday's moon, we call it Somavara after Soma/Chandra, the moon god. Tuesday is Mangalvar for Mars, etc. There's also a famous notion from an ancient scripture, Brihatparasara Hora Shastra, that Lord Vishnu incarnated as the Navagraha, the 9 planets, to dispense karma to living beings. In other words, the planets are avatars of the divine whose role is to bestow the results of our actions, reward or punishment, to maintain cosmic order. This is a very explicit statement in our tradition. Janardhan, Vishnu, has incarnated as the grahas to bestow on the living the results of their karma. It aligns nicely with what you said, planets as instruments of the divine will or justice. Saturn, for instance, is feared because he delivers the tough lessons of our past misdeeds. Hence Shani is a slow, heavy influence, whereas Jupiter may deliver the fruits of our good deeds. Hence Guru is generous and protective. Each planet has a metaphysical duty. Sun, Surya, gives vitality and represents the soul. Moon, Chandra, rules the mind and emotions. Mercury, Buddha, the intellect and communication. Venus, Shukra, desires, art, and romance. Saturn, Shani, discipline and suffering for growth. Rahu, the north node, gives material obsession and innovation. Ketu, the south node, gives spiritual insight, sometimes through loss.
This is wonderfully rich. Our traditional astrology did not use Rahu Ketu as explicitly, though modern Western astrology does consider the lunar nodes, often calling them the dragon's head and tail. But we did have an understanding of eclipses which in myth were caused by a cosmic serpent. Interestingly parallel to your Rahu Ketu demon story, the Kabbalists mostly focused on the 7 planets visible to the naked eye. In practical terms, medieval Jewish astrologers would interpret a chart similarly to other medieval astrologers, looking at planetary dignities, aspects, etc. But a Kabbalistic astrologer might layer additional meaning, e.g., Saturn is not just any malefic, it's also linked to the Sabbath and the idea of rest and restriction. Thus it's destructive in some ways but also holy in its highest aspect bina. Jupiter might be seen as aligned with the divine name of mercy, etc. In this way, planets can be seen as spiritual teachers. Saturn teaches through hardship, Jupiter through grace, Mars through courage and trials, Venus through relationships and beauty, Mercury through knowledge, Moon through imagination and change, Sun through leadership and will.
Yes. We often say grahas seize you. They grab hold of your psyche in certain ways to teach you. Saturn might seize you with loneliness or delays until you learn patience and resilience. In both systems, I think practitioners learn to respect the planets as intelligent forces, whether we frame them as angels or gods, or simply as facets of the one divine. We treat them with a kind of reverence. That's why rituals or prayers to planets exist in our tradition, not to idolize them separate from God, but to honor the divine force working through them. It sounds like early Kabbalistic astrologers approached it similarly, acknowledging planetary influence while ultimately serving the one God beyond them.
Correct. Maimonides the Rambam, a great medieval Jewish sage, actually warned against the mistake of the ancients who began to worship the stars rather than the one who made them. The Torah strictly forbids idolizing celestial bodies, but using them as tools for understanding was permitted by many rabbinic authorities, especially when seen through a monotheistic lens. So, for us, the planets are like the executive branch of God's governance of the physical world. They rule zodiac signs, yes, but God rules them. Kabbalistically, each planet is given power over certain life realms, like livelihood, war, love, etc. Yet the righteous can appeal directly to God to override a planet's decree. Your Vishnu, as planets doctrine, is a more explicit deification of the planets. But, ultimately you too stress a supreme divinity that those planets represent. Our metaphysics align more than one might expect at first glance.
I find that heartening. It means a Vedic astrologer and a Kabbalist astrologer can both see each other's craft as working within a divinely ordained system, not mere superstition. Now, moving from planets, shall we explore the fixed stars and other cosmic subdivisions you mentioned? Nakshatras on my side and perhaps the Sefirot or other stars on yours? The fixed stars in Vedic astrology are primarily addressed through the Nakshatras. There are 27, sometimes 28, Nakshatras, each covering 13 degrees 20 of the zodiac. They're essentially a finer filter than the 12 signs. Each nakshatra is anchored to one or more prominent stars or star clusters. For example, Rohini nakshatra is marked by Aldebaran, the eye of Taurus. Mool nakshatra has the galactic center region. Puchaya nakshatra has 3 stars in Cancer, etc. These nakshatras carry rich mythological stories. Each has a presiding deity. They are used especially for the moon's position, since the moon moves about 1 nakshatra per day. They also drive our calendar for rituals and are crucial in electional astrology, choosing auspicious timings. For instance, certain nakshatras are considered excellent for weddings, others for laying foundations of a house, and some are avoided for certain activities. We also use them in compatibility. Comparing the moon nakshatras of 2 people is central to traditional Hindu marriage matching. So, fixed stars via nakshatras add an extra layer of meaning and precision. 2 people might both be Geminis in Sidereal, but one with moon in the early part, Mrigashirsha nakshatra, versus late part, Punarvasu nakshatra, will have different nature.
Historically, Jewish astrology did not formalize something like nakshatras, but we do have an awareness of certain important fixed stars. Medieval Hebrew texts mention stars like Koshav, Yaakov perhaps referencing Jupiter, or a specific star, and constellations like Kima the Pleiades and Kessil Orion, which even appear in the Bible. However, Kabbalistic astrology tends to incorporate a different set of subdivisions, the Sefirot and the Hebrew letters. Instead of dividing the ecliptic by star clusters, Kabbalah divides creation via the 10 Sefirot and the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The 12 zodiac signs correspond to 12 of those letters, and the 7 classical planets correspond to 7 double letters in Hebrew, which have dual pronunciations. The remaining 3 letters correspond to the classical elements. So our mystical subdivision isn't spatial like fixed star segments, but symbolic and linguistic. Each month sign is associated with a Hebrew letter, a tribe, and an element of the body or soul. For example, the month of Leo Av corresponds to the letter Tet U, and the tribe of Judah, and Leo is associated with the heart and the body. There's an entire matrix of correlations. 12 tribes, 12 signs, 12 Hebrew months, 12 parts of the body. This is described in texts like Sefer Yetzirah and later Kabbalistic writings.
That's intriguing. It's as if instead of starry nakshatras, you use sacred letters and tribes as your fixed points of reference. It's a more symbolic map, whereas ours is more astronomical. In practice, did Kabbalists track specific fixed stars for omens or astrology? We in India certainly did due to nakshatras. For instance, we pay attention to when a planet conjoins certain powerful fixed stars, like Regulus, Aldebaran, etc., though we call them by Sanskrit names like Magha for Regulus. In some cases, specific stars are considered portents. For example, the heliacal rising of Sirius, called Tishya or Lubdakaya in Sanskrit, was significant in ancient Indian calendar making.
In the classic rabbinic literature, there's not a lot of overt use of individual stars beyond the zodiac constellations. But one interesting concept from the Kabbalists is the idea of mazal, not just meaning constellation but a divine flow. The Zohar, a core Kabbalistic text, speaks of mazala as a source of destiny. There's even mention that the flow of destiny depends on one's mazal zodiacal sign or star influence, and how the moon representing the Shekinah, the divine feminine presence, interacts with the sun. While not as systematized as your Nakshatras, it shows that Kabbalists did consider the arrangement of stars and planets as affecting the soul's journey. Also, Kabbalists were aware of the teli, a mysterious term in Sefer Yetzirah often interpreted as the dragon's axis or line of the nodes, possibly analogous to the lunar nodes Rahu Ketu or the celestial pole. Some later Kabbalistic interpretations say the teli is like a karmic axis or the spine of the heavens, which is interestingly close to the idea of the nodes being karmic points in Vedic astrology.
So although the terminology differs, each tradition addresses both broad zodiac signs and more granular divisions or points. Nakshatras for us, tribes/letters, and maybe certain key stars for you. And each has a concept of a cosmic axis or node. Our Rahu/Ketu, your Teli or dragon in the sky. We also consider the galactic center in Sagittarius as a sort of cosmic womb, and certain stars like Spica, Algol, etc., have meanings in our lore. Likewise, I recall that some later Western esoteric astrologers, like Hermetic or Renaissance astrologers, did work with fixed stars. Aldebaran, Antares, Regulus, form a lot. The four royal stars. Perhaps some Jewish astrologers, influenced by Hellenistic and Arabic astrology, also noted those.
Yes, in the medieval period, Jewish scholars like Abraham ibn Ezra wrote works on astrology that included what they learned from Arabic and Greek sources. So they did mention stars and lots, etc. But strictly within the Kabbalistic paradigm, the preference was to tie everything back to biblical symbols: 12 tribes, 12 stones on the high priest's breastplate, 7 branches of the temple menorah for the 7 planets, etc. It was a way to integrate astrology into the sacred worldview, without adopting a foreign cosmology wholesale. The high priest's breastplate having 12 gemstones with the names of the tribes is often cited as a hint to the zodiac correspondence. Each gemstone's color was linked by some to its tribe zodiac sign. So in place of your star lore, we had a gemstone tribe lore as a cipher for astrological signs. It's like two parallel symbolic systems, one looking up at the stars, the other looking down at tribal symbols, but both aligning with the 12-fold zodiac.
That's wonderful. And ironically, gemstones are a big part of our astrological practice too. As I mentioned earlier, we prescribe gems associated with planets, like ruby for the Sun, sapphire for Saturn, emerald for Mercury, etc. as remedial tools. Perhaps those 12 tribal gems each resonated with the planet ruling the tribe's zodiac sign. In a way, both systems see the material, stones, and celestial stars as connected. The nakshatra stars above, and the jewel on the breastplate below, both shining lights used for guidance.
Nice parallel. This shows an overlap, a belief in correspondences between heaven and earth. Whether fixed stars or fixed symbols, these are reference points that impart specific influences or meanings beyond the generic sign meanings.
Exactly. We subdivide to get more nuance. A sidereal sign spans 30 degrees, but within it there are usually 2 or 2.5 nakshatras which explain why. Say, an early Aries, Ashwini, person differs from a late Aries, Kritika nakshatra, person. And you might say a Nisan born, Aries, person from the tribe of Judah might differ from a Nisan-born person from Issachar, if such distinction is made, or some other letter-influenced nuance.
Typically, each month is dominated by one tribe, since each tribe corresponds to one month in our tradition. For example, Aries equal to month of Nisan equal to tribe of Judah, Taurus equal to Iyar equal to Issachar, Gemini equal to Sivan equal to Zebulun, etc. The tribes encamped in groups of 3 corresponding to the 4 directions and 4 seasons. So yes, we had subgroups but not overlapping, one tribe per sign. Still, it created a rich tapestry, Judah Aries Leon, Issachar Taurus Bull and so on. This likely enhanced the archetypal storytelling of each sign.
In summary, while Vedic astrology uses fixed stars and Nakshatras as celestial subdivisions and mythic story arcs, Kabbalistic astrology uses Sefirot, tribes, and Hebrew letters as a mystical subdivision system. Both aim to deepen the astrological narrative beyond the 12 main signs, rooting it in a broader cosmological or spiritual structure.
Let's discuss the occult or mystical frameworks that each of our traditions embed astrology into. For Kabbalah, the prime diagram is the tree of life. The 10 Sefirot connected by 22 paths, often associated with the 22 Hebrew letters. Astrology fits into this diagram in multiple ways. We already talked about planets aligning with certain Sefirot. Additionally, the 12 zodiac signs plus 7 planets plus 3 elements total 22, which were mapped to the 22 paths on the tree by later mystics, especially in Hermetic Kabbalah. While an Orthodox Kabbalist might not use the exact diagram the Golden Dawn or occultists use, the underlying idea is similar. The tree of life is like a cosmic map from the divine to the material, and the zodiac and planets are part of that map. Each Sephira can be seen as a level of reality. For example, Chokmah, wisdom, is sometimes associated with the infinite all-encompassing zodiac circle, and Bina, understanding, with the structure of Saturn's sphere, etc., with the lower Sefirot engaging with planetary forces. This way, one can meditate on the tree of life to spiritually elevate oneself above lower influences. Astrology here isn't just for predicting events, it's for understanding the soul's placement in a divine hierarchy, and for occult work like talismanic magic or meditation. The diagram above is a classic depiction of the Kabbalistic tree of life, with Hebrew names of the Sefirot. While it doesn't explicitly show planets or signs, Kabbalists often correlate those spheres with celestial bodies as I described. For instance, the Sephira Tiferet center of the tree is associated with the sun, and you can imagine the 6 Sefirot from Chesed to Yesod corresponding to the 7 classical planets with sun in the middle and moon at Yesod. This symbolic mapping means each planetary influence is also a spiritual lesson, or a gate on the path back to the One.
In Vedic astrology, a prominent occult framework is less diagrammatic and more calculational, the Dasha system. Dashas are planetary periods that map out the unfolding of your karma through time. The most commonly used is Vimshottari Dasha, a 120-year cycle that assigns a certain number of years to each planet's rulership in your life. For example, Ketu 7 years, Venus 20, Sun 6, Moon 10, Mars 7, Rahu 18, Jupiter 16, Saturn 19, Mercury 17 equals 120. The sequence starts from the moon's nakshatra at birth. This is a uniquely Vedic development. It's like a temporal map of destiny. It doesn't have a visual symbol like the tree, but it's a profound framework. At any given time, you're in, say, your Saturn major period, Mahadasha, and within that a Mercury sub-period, Antardasha, and so on. This layered timing tells the astrologer what karma is ripening when. It's almost like a 4th dimension added to the static chart. Spiritually, one could say that dashas teach that everything has its season, a time for certain lessons to manifest. For instance, a Saturn dasha might be a 19-year phase of maturation, hardship, and discipline, very fated feeling, whereas a Jupiter dasha might bring expansion, learning, and grace.
That's fascinating. A different kind of occult system, oriented toward time rather than symbol space. Western astrology has something loosely analogous in the old Sidereal or planetary periods, and modern progressions, but nothing as elaborate or universally used as your dashas. In Kabbalah, time cycles were noted 7-year cycles, 50-year jubilee cycles, etc., mostly for communal spiritual rhythms. But we don't have a personal life roadmap akin to dashas given by birth configurations. Instead, we tended to rely on transits, where the planets move currently relative to your natal chart or historical cycles. Some Kabbalists might quietly note, for example, the the Saturn return, age 28 to 30, as a major life reorientation, even if they didn't call it that formally. But nothing beats the elegance of the Vimshatari Dasha you described.
It is elegant, and also quite esoteric. One wonders how the ancient sages devised it. Now, about other symbolism. We have the concept of the chakras, subtle energy centers in the body, usually 7 main ones, which sometimes get linked to planets or signs. But that's more in yoga/tantric traditions than mainstream astrology. However, an occult-minded Vedic astrologer might meditate on a client's chart with chakra correspondences or use yantras, mystic diagrams, for planets. For example, each planet has a geometric yantra and specific mantra. Using these is a kind of astral magic we call tantric remedies. It's parallel to how a practical Kabbalist might use the tree of life and sacred names/angelic sigils in talismans.
Absolutely. Practical Kabbalah. Our term for magical work, historically included making talismans or amulets, kamiyot, at astrologically auspicious times. One famous example, Rabbi Abraham Abulafia in the 13th century, described techniques of meditation with Hebrew letters under certain star influences. Also Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, 16th c., hinted that the colors of zodiac signs, their tribal correspondences, and the stones on the breastplate were used in magical operations as part of practical Kabbalah. This suggests that a Kabbalist might create an amulet, or perform a ritual on a day and hour ruled by a friendly planet, using that planet's associated colors, letters, and divine names to draw down its positive influence. It's the same principle as your yantras and mantras for planetary remediation, different ritual language, same intent.
Indeed. We also choose moments to begin rituals, muhurta or electional astrology, based on planetary hours and days. For instance, to appease Saturn, one might do a Shani Puja, Saturn ritual, on Saturday, Saturn's day, during Saturn's hour, under a Saturn strong transit. I'm sure a practical Kabbalist, say for Mars, might do something on Tuesday in the hour of Mars with a talisman inscribed with the Hebrew letter Gimel. If I recall, Sefer Yetzirah assigns Gimel to Mars and the sign Aries, or perhaps the Psalm verse that correlates. Both systems have this rich tapestry of occult correspondences. For you, letters, angels, divine names, etc. And for us, mantras, deities, yantras. But the underlying idea is to channel cosmic forces for spiritual elevation or assistance.
Well said. The tree of life in meditation allows one to rise through planetary spheres back to the divine source. In fact, there was a practice among some Kabbalists of visualizing ascending through the 7 heavens associated with the 7 planets, leaving behind the influence of each, to reach the throne of God. This is somewhat analogous to the yogic ascent through the chakras, or the idea of piercing the veils of Maya that each planet can represent. Each sphere on the tree is like a curriculum. Master its lesson and move upward.
That's a beautiful parallel. Ascension through the planetary lessons. In Indian philosophy, the soul must ultimately rise beyond even the heavenly planets to reach moksha, liberation. Even living in the realm of the gods, Swargaloka, is temporary. One should aim for the supreme spiritual state beyond the cosmos. Astrology, when used wisely, maps where we are on that journey and what we have yet to overcome. I see the tree of life as another way to depict that journey.
Yes, astrology and these occult frameworks are ultimately in service of spiritual growth, not just fortune-telling. Which segues nicely into our next topic, the relationship between astrology and broader spiritual practices like magic, ritual, and ethics.
From the Vedic perspective, astrology has always been intertwined with ritual and spirituality. For example, before any major Vedic ritual, say, a fire sacrifice or a temple inauguration, an astrologer is consulted to find an auspicious time, Muhurta. The alignment of stars and planets is crucial to ensure the ritual taps into the right cosmic currents. Each day of the week, each phase of the moon, each nakshatra carries a quality that can enhance or hinder certain workings. For instance, we avoid starting important ventures during a void called Rahukal, a period each day ruled by the North Node, considered inauspicious for beginnings. Conversely, a day like Akshaya Tritiya, when both sun and moon are exalted astrologically, is considered so auspicious that one can start anything without needing a separate election. It's naturally blessed. On the personal level, astrology informs our remedial rituals. People perform Navagraha Homa, a fire ceremony for the 9 planets, to alleviate doshas, flaws, in their chart. Wearing a gemstone is a kind of magical act, The stone is believed to absorb negative rays or augment positive rays from its corresponding planet. Mantras to planets are chanted as both prayer and vibration to attune oneself to that planetary energy. All these show that for us, astrology isn't just theory, it's practice. It's about actively working with cosmic forces to harmonize one's life with the dharma.
In Judaism, open magical rituals are more restrained due to religious caution. But historically there was a robust tradition of astrological magic and ritual in the undercurrent, especially in what we call practical Kabbalah. For instance, certain prayers or psalm recitations are recommended at specific lunar phases. The new moon Rosh Chodesh is practically a mini festival for us. Blessings are said, and in mystical circles, meditations on the Birkat Halavana, blessing on seeing the first crescent, have astrological undertones of renewing one's fortune. We time our holidays by the moon and sun. Passover is the first full moon of spring, sun in Aries, moon in Libra, which certainly has symbolism, full moon of Libra equal to balance, freedom, fitting the Exodus theme. There's a belief that each Hebrew month's astrological sign influences the spiritual opportunities of that month. For example, Tishrei Libra is the time of divine judgment. We have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur then, and Libra's scales tie into the theme of weighing deeds. That's a cosmic synchronicity we ritualize. Moreover, Kabbalists constructed amulets with Hebrew names of angels and divine names associated with planets for protection or healing. They would make these under the correct astrological conditions, say, a Mars talisman for protection, made when Mars is strong and not afflicted, etc. Very much like the Solomonic talismanic traditions. King Solomon is a figure associated with commanding demons via astrological timing, according to later legend.
Fascinating. King Solomon sounds akin to a Siddha in our tradition, a master of occult who can control spirits and planets. In India, astrologer priests definitely engage in tantric rituals to remedy charts. For example, if one has Mangala dosh, Mars affliction affecting marriage, a priest might perform a Mangal Shanti ritual to pacify Mars. We also have the idea of yajnas, sacrifices, specifically for planets. For example, a Saturn Yagya during the tough period of Shade Sati, the 7.5 years when Saturn transits around one's moon, considered challenging. People will donate black sesame seeds, iron, or feed the poor on Saturdays to appease Saturn. These are practical, action-based remedies rooted in astrological belief. It's practically a folk magic integrated with religion. There's no hard line between astrology and daily religious life for many Hindus. Checking the Panchang, astrological calendar, for good times, performing recommended remedies, observing fasts on certain planetary weekdays, like fasting on Thursdays to honor Jupiter and seek his blessings. These are common.
In Judaism, while many of those practices became less mainstream, some persist in subtle ways. For example, there's a custom that a bride and groom fast on their wedding day, and their ketubah, marriage contract, is signed at an auspicious hour. Likely echoing an older astrological election notion, we consider the wedding under the huppah as akin to Yom Kippur. For them, but practically, one avoids marrying during certain moon phases or Mercury retrograde-like periods according to folk wisdom. Also, traditional Jewish marriage matching considered the couple's birth dates or mazal to ensure compatibility, not unlike how you match horoscopes. In Hasidic stories, there are references to great rebs giving blessings or timing things based on celestial signs. And certainly the idea of giving tzedakah, charity, to avert an evil decree is akin to offering something to alter one's fate. A spiritual transaction that assumes the decree, perhaps seen in the stars, can be changed by a good deed.
That's very interesting. The means differ: charity, prayer, fasting on your side, mantra, donations, fasting on specific days on mine. But the goal is the same: using ritual actions to influence destiny, or rather, to align ourselves with divine grace so destiny shifts. Both our cultures also value that ultimately, ethical living and devotion are the best remedies. Astrology is never a substitute for virtue or faith.
Yes, an old teaching in Judaism, the wise man dominates the stars, which is often understood to mean by wisdom and virtue one rises above fate. Some rabbis were critical of over-reliance on astrology for this reason, fearing people would neglect moral responsibility. Kabbalists responded by framing astrology as another facet of God's interactive relationship with us, not a separate deterministic system. So performing rituals or mitzvot to change fate is really appealing to God, not twisting a planet's arm, so to speak. The planet is just the delivery mechanism.
Likewise, Our view is that remedial measures work by invoking divine energies that counteract or balance the karmic influences shown by planets. There's a saying that graha, planet, gives results by the will of God. So if God's will, which can be entreated by prayer, is engaged, the graha may relent in its harshness. Our classic texts also emphasize personal effort. Purushakara, self-effort, can change fate. So, an astrologer will never say you are doomed but might say you have these challenges, and here's what you can do spiritually and practically to improve things.
It seems both of us see astrology as a guide, not an absolute ruler, and both integrate it into a larger spiritual life, timing of rituals, framing personal growth, etc. This enriches our religious practice. It makes one feel connected to the cosmos during prayer or ritual, seeing it as synchronized with celestial rhythms.
Exactly. For example, meditating at sunrise feels like aligning with sun's energy. Doing mantra on Ekadashi, 11th lunar day, feels potent for spiritual progress, etc. When you see life as enmeshed with cosmic rhythms, every action can take on a sacred timing. That, I believe, is a gift of astrological awareness in both traditions.
Well put. Now, shall we tackle the interplay of modern interpretations versus ancient texts? How has each tradition evolved or stayed true over time?
Vedic astrology is often proud of its ancient textual heritage. We frequently cite sages like Parasara, Gemini, or Varahamihira. However, it's not static. The core techniques and philosophies from classics like Brihat Parasara Hora Shastra, circa 1st millennium CE, still guide us. Things like Dashas, Yogas, planetary combinations, and the Sidereal Zodiac come from there. But modern practitioners have adapted and expanded interpretations. For instance, historically, Vedic astrology didn't use the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, as they were unknown to the ancients. Traditionalists still mostly ignore them or give only marginal importance, maybe considering them for mundane world events. But some contemporary Vedic astrologers, influenced by Western astrology, have started to incorporate Uranus, which they call Aruna or Indra, Neptune, Varuna, Pluto, Yama maybe, in their readings, especially for generational effect. Then there's the influence of psychological astrology. Ancient texts are very event predictive and character descriptive in often fatalistic terms. This yoga gives poverty, this gives kingship. Modern sensibilities seek a more psychological or spiritual interpretation. So a modern Vedic astrologer might reframe an afflicted moon not as you will have mental trouble but as you might struggle with emotional balance and thus should practice mindfulness or mantra to moon for stability. The essence is similar but presented with a growth mindset. Also, computational tools and statistics have allowed testing of classical rules, refining which old aphorisms consistently hold true and which might have been contextual.
In Kabbalistic astrology, the challenge is that ancient sources are fewer and more cryptic. Sefer Yetzirah is one primary ancient text, dates anywhere from 2nd to 9th century, which sets a framework linking letters, planets, signs, and elements. The Zohar 3rd century has scattered astrological references. Much of practical Jewish astrology in history came from cross-cultural exchange: Babylonian, Hellenistic, Arabic. The Orthodox Jewish Kabbalist today has to reconcile these sources with mainstream Jewish theology. Some, like Rabbi Moses Nachmanides Ramban in the 13th century, were receptive to astrology and even did charts, whereas others like Maimonides scorned it. Modern Kabbalistic astrologers, for example those in circles like the Kabbalah Center, have built a system that sometimes diverges from the strictly traditional. They might incorporate the outer planets, talk about reincarnation Gilgul explicitly in the chart as tikkun rectification tasks, and use modern Western astrological techniques, but framing it all in Kabbalistic language. There's a concept in some modern Kabbalistic astrology teachings of one's tikkun being visible via the lunar nodes. Very much a borrowing from evolutionary Western astrology, which says the south node equal to past life, north node equal to this life's lesson. Traditional texts didn't say this outright, but it's an example of a modern interpretation layered onto Kabbalah. Purists might be wary, but it's a way the practice stays living.
We have a similar dynamic with the concept of past lives and spiritual lessons. While karma and rebirth are intrinsic to the philosophy, older texts didn't always spell out this placement equals that past life. Modern Vedic astrologers, perhaps influenced by Western counterparts or regression research, sometimes assign specific past life narratives to charts. For example, Rahu, North Node, in a certain house might be interpreted as a strong desire carried from past life, etc. This is not explicit in classical verses, but it's a reasonable extrapolation under karmic theory. As long as it helps people understand themselves and grow, such interpretation is welcome. However, we caution not to depart too far from core principles. For example, some New Age adaptations might ignore the structured techniques and just do intuitive readings. That drifts from the traditional rigor. There's a balance in keeping the wisdom of the ancients, which is time-tested, and updating language and details for the present.
For Orthodox Jewish practitioners, there's also the need to stay within theological bounds. Modern astrology introduced concepts like the Age of Aquarius, astrological psychology, etc., but a Kabbalist would sift those through the lens of Torah. One major difference is our reverence for ancient revelation. If something is in the Talmud or Zohar, it carries weight, even if modern science disputes astrology. We might say, our sages knew secrets that transcend contemporary scientific understanding. At the same time, obvious errors like outdated astronomy are usually acknowledged. For instance, the Talmud speaks of the sun's path and planets in a geocentric way. We now frame that symbolically, not literally. Similarly, while a modern Kabbalist might know of the tropical Sidereal debate, they'll likely stick to the traditional Hebrew calendar method because it's part of our received tradition. So modern interpretation in our context often means expanding on hints in ancient texts with contemporary astrological knowledge, rather than outright replacing old doctrine. An example, the Zohar correlates signs to tribes. A modern Kabbalist might expand each of those correlations with psychological traits per sign gleaned from general astrology, to flesh out what each tribe's essence might mean for a person born under that sign.
Nicely put. We too respect classical authority. For instance, Parasara or other sages are often invoked almost like infallible sources, but practitioners quietly make adjustments. One example, Vargottama, planet in same sign in main chart and Navamsha chart, is classically auspicious, but some modern studies showed it's not universally great unless that sign is supportive. So astrologers updated their interpretation. Vargottama amplifies, good if the sign and planet are good, bad if not. This kind of tweak keeps the system logical. Also, with modern life, new questions arise. Our ancients didn't talk about stock markets, cars, or computers. We extrapolate from principles. Mercury rules communication, so it covers computers and phones. Cars might be third house short travel or fourth house vehicles. Similarly, compatibility in modern age might consider psychological compatibility more, whereas ancient texts often stressed things like matching caste or family status shown in charts. We adapt those guidelines to modern egalitarian contexts. For example, focusing on emotional and physical compatibility factors in charts rather than social status indicators.
In Jewish astrology, one modern issue is how much to integrate scientific astronomy. Our calendar is calculated and very precise, but historically our astrology had geocentric and even Aristotelian concepts like each planet in a crystalline sphere. Modern Kabbalists are aware of the vast universe, galaxies, etc. Some have tried to draw parallels, like equating the Ein Sof infinite God to the infinite universe beyond, or pondering extraterrestrial life and its astrological implication. There's Talmudic speculation about 12 constellations for 12 worlds of beings, but these remain fringe discussions. The core practice still revolves around our zodiac, planets, and lots like part of fortune, which haven't changed. If anything, there's a revival of interest in those old techniques through a modern lens.
Yes, revival is a good word. In India, astrology never died out, so it didn't need revival, but it has certainly seen modernization. Through software, university courses on astrology, there are colleges offering Vedic astrology degrees now, and integration with psychology and medicine. Some Ayurvedic doctors use astrology to time treatments or diagnose constitutional imbalances.
In the Jewish world, astrology went underground for a few centuries because of rationalist pushback, and later because of the Enlightenment. But today, especially in more mystical circles, there's a resurgence of interest. People are translating old Hebrew astrological manuscripts, teaching Kabbalistic astrology seminars, etc. They often have to rely on Western astrological knowledge as well, since the Jewish sources alone aren't a full how-to. So a modern Kabbalistic astrologer might use a standard astrological chart, but interpret it with Hebrew months and Kabbalistic correspondences. This syncretic approach is arguably very old, since Jews historically learned from and contributed to general astrology, but now it's being done in the open again, with careful respect for what our sages permitted.
It seems both of us honor the ancient masters but are willing to grow the practice to remain relevant. That's a hallmark of a living tradition. Now, for our final topic, let's explore an area dear to many, compatibility and soul connections.
Judaism values the idea of a soulmate, we say zivug or bashert, meaning destined partner. Interestingly, there's a midrash that says 40 days before a child is formed, a heavenly voice announces, "The daughter of so-and-so is destined for so-and-so." This implies a match made in heaven. Now, does astrology play a role in identifying or understanding that match? Traditionally, some Jewish communities consulted astrologers to check marriage compatibility, though officially rabbis often frowned on making it a necessity. Kabbalistically, one might view two charts to see if there is harmonious element balance, e.g., one's predominant element complements the other's, or if there are shared sign correspondences, perhaps their tribal associations are friendly, etc. There's even an idea that a husband and wife are like sun and moon. The sun male energy and moon female energy need to be in proper phase for marital harmony. Some modern Kabbalistic astrologers look at the lunar nodes. If two people's nodes are reversed, a common indicator in Western astrology for a past life or deep soul connection, they might say these two souls are coming together to fulfill each other's tikkun soul correction. While ancient texts don't spell out synastry techniques the way Vedic or Western texts do, the concept of mazal compatibility exists. For example, if one person is born under Mars influence and another under Venus, Kabbalistically that might mirror the cosmic pair of Gevurah and Hesed, opposite forces that can complement if balanced, or clash if not. So we emphasize that beyond the chart, effort and divine help are key. Two people with perfectly matched horoscopes can still fail if they don't work on the relationship, and conversely, a challenging match can succeed through love and compromise. Astrology is a guide, not a guarantee.
Compatibility, synastry, is a highly developed branch in Vedic astrology, especially for arranged marriages. We have a system called Kuta matching or Ashta Kuta. It assigns points, maximum 36, based on how the couple's moon nakshatras interact. Factors include Dina, health and prosperity; Rashi, emotional compatibility; Gana, temperament compatibility; divine, human, or demonic nature; Yoni, sexual compatibility symbolized by animal pairs, etc. If the score is too low, traditionally the match would be discouraged. However, this system is a bit oversimplified and modern astrologers often go beyond it, examining chart overlays, comparing Venus-Mars for attraction, Moon-Moon for emotional rapport, and the 7th house of marriage in each chart. There's also analysis of karma. Sometimes we see combinations that strongly suggest the two were linked in a past life. For example, one Saturn on the other's moon can indicate a past life duty or bond that carries into this life. We do consider the idea of souls being drawn together to work out karma. For instance, a challenging compatibility might mean these two have come together to resolve past debts, a spiritual perspective that can inspire patience and forgiveness. Conversely, a very easy compatibility could indicate either a reward for past harmony or simply that they have a fresh start with little baggage.
Kabbalah does teach reincarnation Gilgul, albeit not as openly as Eastern traditions. Some Kabbalists suggest that couples find each other to rectify what they couldn't in a previous life. So if I were examining two charts in a Kabbalistic way, I might pay attention to their Saturns for karmic lessons and nodes. Saturn aspecting personal planets between charts could imply a binding past life connection, similar to what you noted. Also, I might look at whether their sun-moon elements are compatible. Fire, air, and water-earth pairings tend to work well, etc. That's more general astrology but valid. Additionally, each Hebrew month has a tribal energy. Say someone born in Kislev, Sagittarius, tribe of Benjamin, and someone in Sivan, Gemini, tribe of Zebulun. In lore, Benjamin was the only full brother of Joseph from the same mother, whereas Zebulun was a half-brother. Not a direct indicator, but a Kabbalist might weave a story. Maybe these two need to reconcile like the tribes did. Sometimes Kabbalistic insight is storytelling that gives the couple a sense of shared destiny or mission, rather than a dry score. For example, if one is born under the sign of Judah, a leader, Judah is a kingly tribe, and the other under Ephraim, another leadership tribe from Joseph's line, there could be a thematic dynamic of kingship and pride to harmonize. This is a very different style from computing points, but can be profound when done intuitively and with knowledge of each tribe's character.
That is interesting. We too have mythological storytelling in compatibility sometimes. For instance, if one partner's star is associated with the deity Shiva and the other is with Parvati, the divine couple, We might poetically say they have a sacred bond, but we also issue practical warnings. For example, Mangalik Dosh. If one has Mars in a house that afflicts marriage and the other doesn't, it's believed the non-Mangalik could suffer unless remedies are done. One remedy in tradition was that the Mangalik person should first symbolically marry a tree or idol to neutralize the Mars effect, then marry the actual person. It sounds superstitious, but it's a ritual way of addressing an energetic mismatch. Modern urban couples often skip such things, but some still quietly observe them.
In Jewish tradition, I haven't heard of marrying a tree to fix a chart. But we do have a belief that if someone is destined, they will end up together, even if signs seem adverse. There's a Yiddish saying, bashert is bashert, meaning destined is destined. So while one might look at astrology, ultimately the match is in God's hands. A pious approach is, do your due diligence, character, values, maybe a peek at the mazal, then pray for guidance. I personally use astrology to help couples understand each other's innate tendencies. If a husband is very Saturnine, say serious, work-focused, not very emotive, and the wife is lunar, emotional, needs nurturing, pointing this out can foster mutual empathy. It's less, are you compatible, yes, no, and more, here's how to navigate your differences and capitalize on your cosmic chemistry.
That's a very mature use of astrology. We try to do that as well. If I see a chart of a spouse who, for instance, has a debilitated Venus, which might indicate difficulty expressing love or affection, I'd advise the other partner that this person may love deeply but struggle to show it conventionally, so don't misinterpret their reserved nature. Or if one has a strong Gemini influence and the other a strong Taurus, one is chatty and changeable, the other steady and stubborn, I'd counsel them to appreciate these differences as complementary rather than fight over them. In essence, astrology can give a couple a language to discuss their dynamics without casting blame. It's our stars, let's work with it. As long as it's not used fatalistically, our stars are doomed, so let's divorce. It can be a tool for growth.
Agreed. Kabbalistically, marriage is seen as a tikkun soul correction in itself, a process that refines both souls. Any astrological frictions are part of that refinement. We sometimes say the very things that attract you are what will also challenge you, purposely, so you both evolve. For example, a very Jupiterian person might be attracted to a very Mercurial person, one expansive, one analytical, because each has something to learn from the other. The Jupiterian needs a bit of Virgo-like detail, and the Mercurial needs a bit of Sagittarius-like faith. God, in our view, arranges matches that will spur growth. So I tell couples, your astrology is the curriculum of your marriage. Understanding it helps you cooperate with the divine lesson plan.
That's a beautiful perspective to end on. Ultimately, astrology, whether Kabbalistic or Vedic, is about understanding the self, the other, and the forces at play, so that we can live in greater harmony with each other and the cosmos. Both our systems, at their best, encourage compassion, personal responsibility, and awe for the divine design.
Yes, we have traveled vast intellectual and spiritual ground in this dialogue, yet I sense how aligned our intentions are. We started from different premises, divine will versus karma, tropical versus sidereal, and yet converged on similar wisdom, that the heavens declare the glory of the Creator, as the Psalms say, and that we, as creatures under the heavens, can gain wisdom from them. But that wisdom ultimately points us back to ethical living and spiritual connection.
In the Rig Veda it is said, Rata, the cosmic order, sustains everything. Astrology is a language of that Rata. Whether through Kabbalah or Jyotish, we seek to read that cosmic order. I have learned so much about your perspective, and it enriches my own.
The feeling is mutual. Our debate turned into a harmony of ideas. Perhaps that itself is a testament to what happens when two people of different backgrounds earnestly seek truth. It's like two stars in conjunction, shining brighter together. Thank you for this exchange. It has been truly elevating.
Thank you as well. Shalom and Namaste. Both mean peace in our languages. May the peace and wisdom of the stars guide us and all who listen toward greater understanding.